And then I always want to ask you about journalism.
Yeah.
So did you know early on that you were going to get into journalism, or how did that progress?
So what do you mean by early on?
Like when I wanted to be a SEAL and wanted to write since I was
a kid.
7. Yeah.
I don't think I was always kind of like writing in a journal, and that's something that my dad does. My mom has a degree in English and was a professor for some of her career. But I don't remember as a kid wanting to be a journalist. I remember wanting to be a weather lady, like the weather map. So I guess that kind of counts. But my career path was one that I kind of like stumbled into, but then it was like, oh yeah, duh, this is obviously what I should have been doing. So, went to college because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to college, and was a business major for a while. Didn't want to do that. Got to my second accounting class and decided that the charts were too much for me. And so then I switched to political science minor with a major in broadcast journalism. And the reason I made that switch was I was unhappy with my current degree path. And also I went to a Young America's Foundation conference in Santa Barbara, California, and listened to people like Dennis Prager speak. And they have the Reagan Ranch Center there, and then they have the Reagan Ranch. And that really like changed it was like the moment where I was like, oh, duh, like this is obviously what I should be doing. Like I was always debating in high school, loved like the debate classes that I was in, loved like, I almost wanted to be a lawyer, but then I went to college and was like, I would prefer not to do more schools, but I did like teen court and like all this kind of like, I went to law camp in high school.
Wow.
At Stanford.
No way.
And I won all of my cases, I will say.
No way.
Yeah. So it was more like I thought I was on a path to be a lawyer. And then I got to college and was like, don't really want to do more school. And then my parents' deal was like, we'll help you pay for college, but you have to major in business. And then that didn't go very well. So kind of like stumbled into it. But then once I realized, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. Like it wasn't necessarily just about journalism. It was more about like debate and finding arguments and looking at the facts of something. And then got into broadcast journalism and into the local student TV station. And I started like a little show there, like a weekly brief where I would talk about like what the student government was doing, what the state government was doing, and then what they were doing in DC. So it was like a 3-level tier thing of informing people about what was going on. And then I moved to DC for a summer to work for Town Hall Magazine and townhall.com as a intern. Lived in DC for the summer, stayed at GW University, like dove in headfirst into all these different places. And then went back to finish my senior year in college and continued working for free from afar. And at the time, it was great because John McCain was running for re-election. This was like right after he ran against Obama and lost, but he was running for re-election in the Senate. So like Sarah Palin was in town, and there was all this really controversial immigration legislation that passed. There was a lot happening on the ground. So I was like writing a lot of stuff and getting published in this magazine that sold in bookstores all over the country, like Barnes & Noble and Borders. And it was like really cool. And I'll never forget that the student newspaper was allegedly looking for a more conservative perspective for a column. So I like walk in for my interview and I have all these printed magazines that are sold in bookstores. I'm like a nationally published, writer, and they didn't hire me. I was so pissed.
Seriously, that was, that's 10 plus years ago now.
Yeah.
Imagine with today.
Right, exactly. So that was kind of how it started. And then after I graduated, my first big viral story was about one of our graduation speakers and how she essentially like called the entire audience racist over this immigration legislation, and it like went viral and with everything. And so that was like the first big story that I had.
And that was Town Hall?
That was at Town Hall. And then I moved to DC and again, just like was going to everything I could, was like on Capitol Hill all the time, listening to hearings, like all this kind of stuff, and really just like getting my hands dirty and like going to the border and doing some reporting from there. And I don't know if you know Matt Thomas from the Pinal County Sheriff's Department, good friend of mine. He took me on like a ride along and I did like all this really cool stuff. And
so for Town Hall though now.
For Town Hall.
You've graduated, you're in DC, you're full-time Town Hall.
They hired me, they gave me a job. I was making $0 basically. And just like working really hard. I was there all by myself, moved across the country, didn't know anybody outside of like my coworkers, and was just like in this beast of a place where there's just like so much happening all the time. And then I just like started from there and Pretty quickly, I got into my first, what eventually became my first book, this Fast and Furious scandal, where ATF was like knowingly giving firearms to Mexican cartels and then actually blaming it on like gun owners and gun shops in Arizona when they were facilitating the whole thing. And so that really kind of like kicked things off. And that got me into more TV. And I used to go on CNN and MSNBC and CNBC and Larry Kudlow. I used to do his CNBC show a lot. So he kind of helped me get off the ground with a TV thing. And then my first big Fox show was Bill O'Reilly, and that was for my book. But the first Fox show I ever did, this is actually kind of a funny story, was Red Eye. So I was in DC for CPAC, which is this big conservative political action conference every year. And I went to CPAC all the time. And I was like the student who was always there trying to like get a job where all of my other friends were like partying and hanging out. And I was like working it with the resumes and the cars and all that stuff. And so I'm working as a young professional. I'm in this like cocktail hour afterward. And I see Greg Gutfeld and his producer and Andy Levy walk into this packed room. Like it was so hot. The line for drinks was like forever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go talk to him. I gotta introduce myself. I gotta give him my card, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm inching closer to them and I can hear Greg complaining about how they're going to leave because the drink line is way too long. And so I'm like, oh no, they cannot leave. And so I like push my way over to them. I'm like, I'll get you a drink. What do you want? And so then I cut the line, got them a drink, came back and gave them their drinks, and they invited me on Red Eye.
Nice. That is awesome.
It was great.
That was a great show.
So then
Greg's hilarious.
I finally get my chance to go on Red Eye, and they don't pay for you to travel to New York. So I bought a bus ticket for $40 and I got on the bus, and it's a 6-hour bus ride to New York. It's usually like 5, but it's always 6. And halfway through the bus ride, a tsunami hits Japan. And they cancel my appearance on the show because it's now this like 24/7 news cycle that they have to go with. And so now I'm like on my way to New York. I'm on a bus. I don't, my brother, I was staying with my brother in his dorm room because he was going to school at a university in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is right across from Manhattan. So I'm staying with my brother in his dorm room where he lives with 2 other guys in like this shoebox. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm just going to go to New York for the weekend because my bus ticket is until Sunday. And now I don't have this Red Eye hit. And I'm like all bummed out. They're not going to invite me back. And so eventually they did invite me back, got back on the bus, went up to New York. And what they do pay for is a car to take you where you want to go after the show. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay. So I'm in this like fancy town car. It's like the first fancy car I've ever been in. I have a driver. It's really exciting. And he takes me to Hoboken to drop me off again at my brother's apartment, right? Or his dorm room. And the driver goes, are you sure this is where you want to be dropped off? And I was like, yeah, this is I'm staying with my brother in his dorm, but thank you for asking. So I've paid my dues, I would say. And I've made it past the sleeping in the dorm room phase.
Yeah. You don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, but it was fun. Yeah. And I remember the day that my boss at town hall told me, Katie, you can start taking the train. The bus tickets are starting to embarrass me. So yeah, I used to ride the bus to New York.